Welcome to the .NET data binding tutorial using C#. So in this tutorial we are going to do a very simple web ASP web application that reads data from the database, and the database that we'll be using is the Microsoft SQL Server. So we'll read data from the database and then display it in the ASPX page using C#. So at the end we should have something like this. So let's begin our tutorial. The first part of this tutorial, we'll start by creating a new database, and to do that we have to open Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio, and then it will give you something like this, and all you have to do is to select database as already selected here. Right click, create a new database, and then it pops up this dialog window, and then we're going to call this database countries, and leave everything as it is, and then click OK. You can see that we have two databases, but we'll be focusing on this one. So right click, select new query. This is where we are going to write our SQL statement to create tables and insert data inside. So I'll quickly copy. We're going to call our table country, and then it will have an ID and country name and continent. So our ID is of type int, is a primary key. We have two other fields, country name and continent. So this should be enough. Highlight all, hit execute. Our table was created successfully. So the next step is to insert data inside this table. So to do that, we have to write the statement instead into the table name country, then specify the columns. We have ID, we have CNAME, and then we have continent. The values that we're inserting, 1 since it's an integer, and then country name. We can say the name of the country, we can say Botswana. Continent, it's Africa. Highlight, execute, and then we need to our second record, we can put China. I don't even know if China is in Asia, but who cares? Yeah, I think 3 records will be more than enough. And before you can go anywhere, let's check if our table has records. Yes. Yeah, so with Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio, we are done. We created our table called country in a database called countries. Then open Visual Studio. I'm using Visual Studio 2019, and then create a .NET web application. Just make sure you are selecting C#. Yes, you can see that there's Visual Basic and there's C#. So we have to select ASP.NET Web Application.NET Framework using C#. So we're selecting this option. Yes, and give our project a name. I'll give it countries tutorial. Yes, that will be enough. Click create. Yes, and leave everything as it is default and only select empty. So we are going to create an empty project. Yeah, and the next step will be to create an ASPX page or form that will display the data from the database we just created. So to do that, we have to right click on our solutions name in the solution explorer, then select add, then add new item, and then we have to select a web form. As you can see, it's here. Select the web form, and then let's call it countries. Yes, then select add. As you can see, it has created a file called countries in ASPX.ASPX, and then with auto-generated default code. Yeah. What we're going to do next is to create a form control that will hold the data from our database. So in this case, we're going to use a panel. So to do that, we have to put the cursor in between the division tag. Yes, and then go to our toolbox, then search a panel, and double click on it. It will automatically create a code for us. So you can see that the code, the panel has an ID of panel 1. Yes, then the next step will be to right click and then select view code, so it will show us the back-end code. Yeah, and before we can do anything, we have to set up the web config. And then the next step will be to create a connection between the database and our application. And to do that, we have to go to View, then select Server Explorer, and then under Connections here, we right click and then select Add Connection. Yes, and we have to use SQL client as already selected here, and then our server name, we have to get our server name. Yes, this is our server name, and then we'll just leave it as default Windows authentication, and then we have to select a database. Yes, and our database is called countries. Select this, and after all this, you have to test our connection. Yes, and our test connection was successful. And you can see that we have a connection here, and the details of that connection in the Solution Explorer. If we expand that, you can see that we have our full connection string here. The next step will be to modify our web.config by adding our connection string. So remember, to get our connection string, you just go to Server Explorer, or you can just go to it by selecting View and then Server Explorer, and then your connection will be listed here. So to get the details, since they are also appearing here, you can simply right click and select Properties, and this will come up. So now we have our full connection string. Yes, and to edit our web.config, inside here we can add our connection string, this, then add, we have to specify the name of the connection. I will call it my con. Yes, and yes, and then the next one will be connection string, which then will copy from the Server Explorer, and then the last one will be the provider name. So the provider name is system.data.xml client. So the value of the connection string, we have to get it from Server Explorer. Yes, here it is. Control C, Control V. So by so doing, we are done with the web.config. Then the next step will be to go back to our backend code and begin coding. So the first part of our coding will be to insert this line of code. If it's not page dot is postback. So inside here, this is where you're going to input our code that is going to fetch data from our database. The first line should be, we need to create a variable that should hold our connection string. So our variable, which is of type string, main con, this is the variable name, equals to, now we have to go to the configuration manager class and get the connection string. And to do that, we have to write the class name configuration manager dot connect. Yeah, and then we forgot to import. First we need to import data system data, and then another one will be system dot data dot SQL client. Yes, and then lastly, for now though, will be the system dot configuration. This is where we are going to get our configurations manager class dot configuration, and then we go back here and then want to access connection string. Yes, then we access connection string. Remember, we have to put in the name of our connection string and then say dot connection string. So this will give us a string that will store it in a variable called main connection, main con. So remember the name of our connection string, not the connection string, but the name. So we have to go back to web.config and get it here. So this is our name, the name of the connection string. So you go back here, then paste it here. Yes, then we have fully done that. And then the next part will be to create an SQL connection. So to do that, we need to create an instance of a SQL connection object. So SQL connection, we'll name it SC because the new SQL connection, and then we have to pass in the connection string. So in this case, our connection string is stored in this variable, so we'll just simply pass this variable to the constructor of the SQL connection class. Yes, then after connection we have to create another instance, but this one will be the SQL command instance, because we need to write an SQL statement to fetch data from our database. So we simply SQL command, I'll simply call it SQL, let's say SQL com, we should be equal to new SQL command. Yes, so the constructor of the SQL command class takes, the one that we're going to use takes two parameters. The first parameter is the SQL statement, which is the query, and then the second one will be the connection. So we have to create a string object, string variable. We'll call it query. This will be the query, an SQL query. So to do that, we can go back to our database and then copy this and then paste it here. Yes, so this is our query, and then in this object we are going to pass this query. Let's see, SQL query. We're going to pass SQL query here, and then the second parameter will be the connection. So we use this reference variable sc here. Now we are done with the SQL command, and the next part will be to, now that we have created a command, created a connection, passed it into the as a parameter to the SQL command object as a parameter, we'll have to now open a connection. So to do that, we have to use the this reference variable of the SQL connection to open a connection. So we say sc.open. This will open a connection to our database. And then after creating a connection, we'll need to use an SQL adapter, the one that will bind the SQL query result to the adapter. So this will be the adapter that we're going to create, will hold the data from the query results. So to do that, we need to create that instance, SQL data adapter. We'll call it SQL data adapter, SDA, which equals to new SQL adapter. So we have to pass in the SQL command instance into our adapter. Yes, after that we have to create a data table. Data table dt equals to new data table. Yes, and then we have to take the data table using the fill method and then pass it as a parameter to the SDA object, and this is our SDA object. So we simply say SDA, which is our adapter. We fill it with the data table, and this will be enough. Yes, so remember that just a quick recap, we created a string that is holding our connection string. our variable main con is holding the connection string. So to get the connection string here, we have to access it through the connection manager class. Yes, this is the syntax. And then we had to create an SQL connection instance named SC, where we have to pass in the connection, because in order to create that connection we need the connection string. So in this case our connection string is the main con variable, and then after that we need to create an instance of the SQL command, and then we pass in the query that we are executing and the connection. So the SQL query is this variable that is holding the SQL statement select all from country. Okay, and then we passing in the instance of SQL connection SC, and then we open a connection. Once the connection is open, we need to now create an adapter that will hold the query results and pass that in here is a parameter to the constructor of the SQL data adapter class. Yes, and then we need to create a data table and then fill the SDA with the instance of the data table using the fill method. Now remember that we have a panel here. So the overall idea is that at the end we have to paste our data to this form control, and to do that, that means the data that comes from the database should be first be converted to text or string and then printed into this panel, and then the browser will then interpret that string, and this should come in a form of an HTML format. So to do that, we go back to our code, and then we will have to make use of there are many ways of doing this, but we'll just explore one of those many ways. So we are going to use a string builder class. So we need to create an instance of string builder. No, just string builder. We need to import this. So we need to import text in order for us to use this class. So we'll name it SB equals to new string builder here, and then from there we need to build our string. So to do that, we have to use the reference variable SB and then use the method append. So the method append appends text to the already existing text. So what we have to pass here is a string, because now we have to send back the string in an HTML format. So that means this is where now we are going to format our string into an HTML format. So first of all, remember at the end we need to have a table, an HTML table that is displaying all the data coming from our table named country. So to do that, that means you have to create a table here and then append data to that table, and then we need to do a bit of styling. That means we have to center our table. So that means all of our code should be within the center tag. So let's do this, then let's copy, because we're going to use a lot of append. So we have our center. I remember that once we have an opening tag, we have to have a closing tag for the center. So that means all of our code will go within the center tag, and the center tag will simply center our controls. That means if we have a header, it will center the header. If we have a table, it will center the table, put it in the center of the page. Yes. So I think it will be appropriate for us to define a header. So h1, and then the closing tag for h1. Yeah, we can write anything here. We can say ASP data binding from database, or whatever you want to write. It's all up to you. Database. Yeah. And then remember, we have to create a table. But before that, let's separate our header from the table. So we can do that by creating a horizontal row. Yes. Yeah. And now we have a header, we need to create a table. Okay, so we can simply use the same approach, the sb.append. Now create a table. Then remember, once you create an HTML tag, you have to create a closing one. So within our table, let's put a border so that we can be able to properly see our table. Border equals 1. Okay, now within our table, remember, a table is made up of rows, and within rows we have columns. So the one thing that we should do is to create a table row, tr table row, then create a closing tag for the table row. Yeah, and then the first row should be the table header. So to do that, we need to put in the columns for the table, for this table. But remember, now we are not going to hard code the column, the column names. So we are going to use the same exact one that come from the database. So to do that, we need to create because the if you can take a look at our table, you can realize that it has the ID, the CNAME, and the continent. So we have 3 elements coming to us. as the column names. So what we are going to simply do is to now create an advanced for loop called for each. Yeah, for each, and then we are going to loop through the data from DT. Remember, DT is holding this DT. This object is holding the information that we need. So what we're going to simply do is to create a column, a data column called, we'll call it DC, in an object called DT. Inside that object we are accessing columns. So what we're simply doing is we are getting inside the data table, and then we are getting columns, column names. So this is a list, yes, and the type is a list of type data column. So this is why we created an object called DC of type data column that will hold elements that are coming from dt.columns. So inside this HTML tags, the raw tags, we are now printing the table headers. Yes, to do that we need to create our first header. It's th. Remember, we need to have a closing one as well, th, and then within them now we have to print the actual data. So the actual data will be the data from this object. So we need to access it by using its reference variable, by saying dc dot, and then we're getting the column name, and then because it's a header we need to, it's optional though, but we keep on convert it to uppercase using the dot, the to upper method. Now this on its own will print our table header. Okay, now after printing our table header, we need to create the second row. Remember, this will be the first row, so we need to create a second row. But now remember that we have we can have as many rows as possible, so we need to create a loop that will print those rows. Then we can still use the same advanced loop. So we are getting rows here. Now we are, the difference between here and between this for each and this one, because this one we are getting columns, but this one we want rows. So we will say data row dr, which is the reference name, in dt.rows. Yes, now this will give us rows, and with then we'll need to use our append to create a row. Remember, once you create a row, opening tag, we have to create a closing one. So just like this. Now remember, within this row we need to create cells known as table document TD. Okay, so that means inside here we need to create another advanced loop, okay, which will print the cells within this row. So this is the same code as this one. Yes, so we can safely copy this and use it here. You don't have to worry about the same reference name because the scope of this DC is within this curly braces. So you can still use the same reference name here, and it's not seeing this, so we can still do the same thing. Remember, we need to create sorry about that, we need to create this. We are creating a table document, which is a cell, and then a closing one, table document. Within the table document we are printing the actual data. Now we'll be accessing an object called dr, which is this object, and then within the dr, within the row, we are referencing a column, okay, which is DC, this one, DC dot column name. We are getting the object of the name of the column by writing this, and then we need to convert this thing, of course, to string. Yes, so this will be enough. So if there are 100 rows, that means this statement will execute 100 times. Yes, and then finally, now that we've done everything, finally we need to now take the data. Remember, all this data, all this HTML formatted code is stored in a variable called SB. So in our variable SB, we need to bind this data to our control. So remember, now our control is, this is our control, panel 1. It's a panel, so we have to use this name, let's say panel 1 dot controls dot add. We are adding a new label, and then our label, we are the property of that label, which is the text. We are assigning it to our object called SB dot to string. That means we are converting everything to string. That means our panel 1 control will contain an HTML formatted string or text, and the browser will automatically interpret that and render it as a table. Yes, now we need to run this and see how it is. Yes, we can see that this is our data from the database. If we can open it, you can see that this is the same exact data that is here with the same exact column names that are here. We have our header and then our horizontal row, and all these elements or controls are centered because we have used the center tag. And yeah, that's it. That's the end of our tutorial. See you in the next tutorial.